She brought her boss as a fake boyfriend to Christmas dinner, but she didn't expect him to kiss her. She shouldn't have said yes when her mother asked if she was bringing someone home for Christmas, but she did. Ariana Lewis stared at her phone screen, her mother's text message glowing like a neon warning sign. "Can't wait to meet him tomorrow, sweetheart. Your aunts are so excited." Him, the mysterious boyfriend who existed only in a moment of panic-driven fiction. Sitting in her pristine Chicago apartment, surrounded by data analytics reports and the soft hum of her laptop, Ariana felt the familiar weight of expectation crushing down on her chest. 26 years old, brilliant, successful, and perpetually single in the eyes of her well-meaning but relentless family. The December wind rattled her windows as she replayed the conversation from 3 weeks ago. Her mother's voice had carried that particular tone, the one that meant business. "Ariana, honey, you know I love you, but if you show up alone to Christmas dinner one more time, your cousin Brandon is going to spend the entire evening trying to set you up with his friend from the gym." The threat had been delivered with maternal sweetness, but Ariana knew better. Her mother meant every word. In that moment of pure desperation, the lie had tumbled out of her mouth before her brain could catch up. "Actually, Mom, I'm seeing someone." The silence that followed had been deafening. "Someone serious?" Her mother had pressed, excitement creeping into her voice. "Yes, very serious. You'll meet him at Christmas." Now, 3 weeks later, Ariana was officially screwed. She glanced at her reflection in the darkened window. Her natural hair framed her face in perfect coils, her dark skin glowing even under the harsh fluorescent lights of her home office. She looked like a woman who had her life together. She looked like someone who wouldn't create an imaginary boyfriend to avoid family interrogation. Appearances, apparently, were deceiving. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her sister, Jasmine. "Mom's been bragging about your mystery man to literally everyone. Auntie Gloria already bought you both matching Christmas sweaters. Please tell me he's real." Ariana buried her face in her hands. Matching sweaters. Dear God. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days analyzing patterns and predicting outcomes for Fortune 500 companies, but she couldn't figure out how to navigate her own love life without resorting to elaborate deception. Her laptop chimed with a familiar sound. Another email from Alexander Ford, her impossibly demanding, ridiculously attractive boss. Even at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, the man was apparently still working. "Need the Morrison Group account projections first thing tomorrow morning." Ariana stared at the email, her mind racing. Alexander Ford, 37 years old, self-made millionaire, CEO of the tech company where she'd worked for the past 2 years. He was everything her family would expect in a boyfriend. Successful, devastatingly handsome. The kind of man who wore $1,000 suits like they were jeans. He was also completely off-limits, emotionally unavailable, and had probably never celebrated Christmas with anyone's family in his entire adult life. Which made him absolutely perfect. The thought hit her like lightning, and before she could talk herself out of it, she was reaching for her coat. 20 minutes later, Ariana stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Ford Technologies, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid Chicago air. The security guard recognized her, one of the perks of working late more often than she cared to admit. "Working late again, Miss Lewis?" "Something like that," she murmured, her heart pounding as the elevator carried her to the 32nd floor. The executive level was quiet, but light spilled from Alexander's corner office. Through the glass walls, she could see him leaning back in his chair, one hand running through his dark hair, as he studied something on his computer screen. He'd loosened his tie and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that had no business being that distracting. Ariana paused, suddenly questioning her sanity. What was she about to do? Ask her boss, her incredibly intimidating, devastatingly attractive boss, to pretend to be her boyfriend? She raised her hand to knock, then lowered it, raised it again, lowered it. "Ariana!" She spun around, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Alexander stood in his doorway, one eyebrow raised in that infuriatingly perfect way he had. I was just," she stammered, then caught herself. Ariana Lewis did not stammer. Ariana Lewis presented quarterly reports to rooms full of executives without breaking a sweat. She straightened her shoulders. "I need to ask you something. At 9:30 on a Wednesday night." "It's important." Something flickered in his green eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or amusement. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter his office. By all means. The space smelled like expensive cologne and the faint hint of coffee. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the Chicago skyline, twinkling with Christmas lights and the promise of snow. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, moving to the small bar in the corner of his office. Yes, please." He poured 2 glasses of what looked like very expensive whiskey, then handed her one. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Ariana felt an unwelcome jolt of electricity shoot up her arm. "So," he said, leaning against his desk with casual elegance, "what's this important thing you need to ask me?" Ariana took a fortifying sip of whiskey, felt it burn down her throat, and looked directly into those impossibly green eyes. "I need you to be my boyfriend." Alexander Ford, a man who had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, who negotiated deals with Fortune 500 CEOs without flinching, nearly choked on his drink. "I'm sorry, what?" Not for real," she added quickly, her cheeks burning. "Fake. I need a fake boyfriend for Christmas dinner tomorrow." The silence stretched between them like a live wire. Alexander set down his glass with deliberate precision, his eyes never leaving her face. "Miss Lewis," he said slowly, "are you asking me to pretend to be in love with you?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to acknowledge. And in that moment, with her heart pounding and her future happiness hanging in the balance, Ariana realized she might have just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the best decision she'd ever made. What would you have done in her place? Continue reading to discover if Alexander says yes. And what happens when the line between fake and real becomes impossible to find? "You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend?" Alexander's voice was steady, controlled, the same tone he used in boardroom negotiations worth millions of dollars. But Ariana caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh before he caught himself. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "For one night. Christmas dinner. My family thinks I'm bringing someone, and I can't show up alone again." He circled around his desk slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. The movement was fluid, deliberate, and it made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with nervousness. "And why exactly would you ask me?" The question carried weight, not just curiosity, but something deeper, something that made the air between them feel charged. Ariana set down her whiskey glass, her mind racing through acceptable answers. "Because you're successful enough to impress them. Because you're handsome enough to make them stop questioning my choices. Because you're the only man I know who could pull this off without making it awkward." Instead, she found herself saying, "Because you're the only person I trust not to make it weird." The honesty surprised them both. Alexander's expression shifted, the corporate mask slipping just enough to reveal something raw underneath. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the soft lamplight. "Your family," he said finally. "They're important to you." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Everything. They're everything to me. And they're pressuring you to..." "What?" "Settle down. Get married. They think I'm broken," she said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. 26, successful, beautiful. Their words, not mine, and perpetually single. They can't understand why I choose work over dating. "Do you? Choose work over dating?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Ariana felt heat creep up her neck as she realized they were venturing into dangerous territory. "I choose work over disappointing relationships with men who can't handle a woman who knows what she wants," she said carefully. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Approval, maybe, or recognition. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that made her think of winter mornings and warm sheets. What exactly would this arrangement entail? Her heart skipped. "You're considering it. I'm gathering information. I don't make decisions without all the facts." Classic Alexander, treating her romantic crisis like a business proposal. Somehow that made her feel more confident. "Dinner. 4 hours maximum. Meet my family, eat my mom's cooking, pretend we're..." She gestured vaguely between them. "Together. Answer a few questions. Maybe hold my hand during grace." "Hold your hand during grace," he repeated, and there was something almost amused in his voice. "My grandmother is very religious." I see. He was standing directly in front of her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. And after dinner? After dinner, we go our separate ways. Monday morning, we're back to being boss and employee, like nothing happened. Like nothing happened, he echoed softly. The way he said it made her stomach flutter, made her wonder if she was being naive to think they could fake intimacy without it affecting their working relationship. Alexander, she said, suddenly needing to break the tension building between them, if this makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't. The quick response surprised her. She searched his face looking for signs of hesitation but found none. Then, you'll do it. He was quiet for so long that she started to worry she'd overstepped, started to imagine Monday morning meetings filled with awkward silences and professional distance. Then he smiled, not his polite, corporate smile, but something real and slightly dangerous. I'll do it, he said, on one condition. What condition? We do this properly. Your family can't suspect it's fake, which means we need to be believable, comfortable with each other, natural. Natural, she repeated weakly, very aware of how unnatural she felt right now. With him standing so close, she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. We should probably practice. Practice. Holding hands, basic couple behavior. The last thing we want is for your family to see us flinch away from each other. The suggestion was practical, logical even. So why did it make her mouth go dry? Right, she managed. Practice. Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, his fingers intertwined with hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture so natural it made her breath catch. His hand was warm, slightly rough from weekend workouts, and larger than she'd expected. It engulfed hers completely, making her feel delicate and protected in a way she rarely experienced. How does that feel? He asked, his voice softer now. Like everything I didn't know I was missing, she thought. Good, she said aloud. Natural. Good. But he didn't let go. Instead, his thumb continued that maddening stroke across her knuckles, sending sparks of awareness up her arm. What time should I pick you up tomorrow? Pick me up? Ariana, he said patiently. Boyfriends don't meet their girlfriends at family dinners. They pick them up. Bring flowers for the mother. Compliment the house. The fact that he understood these details, that he was already thinking like someone who cared about making a good impression, made her heart do something complicated in her chest. 6 o'clock, she suggested. I'll be there at 5:50. Of course he would. Alexander Ford was never late. He released her hand slowly, the loss of contact making her feel oddly bereft. I'll need your address. She recited it automatically, trying not to think about how intimate it felt to give him her home address, to imagine him in her space. Ariana, he said as she moved toward the door, her legs feeling distinctly unsteady. She turned back. What should I know about your family? Names, relationships, topics to avoid. The question was practical, but the way he asked it, with genuine interest, like he actually cared about getting it right, made something warm unfurl in her chest. My mom is Diane. She'll love you instantly if you compliment her cooking. My dad is James. He's quiet but sweet. My sister Jasmine will interrogate you relentlessly, but she means well. And my cousin, she hesitated. Your cousin? He's the one who inspired this whole mess. Just don't let him get under your skin. He likes to push buttons. Alexander's expression darkened slightly. I can handle difficult people. Something in his tone made her believe him completely. Alexander, she said softly, thank you for doing this. I know it's unconventional. Unconventional, he repeated, that almost smile playing at the corners of his mouth again. That's one word for it. She was halfway to the elevator when his voice stopped her. Ariana, she turned one more time. Wear something red tomorrow. Red looks good on you. The elevator doors closed before she could respond, leaving her alone with racing thoughts and the lingering scent of his cologne. As the building disappeared behind her taxi window, one thought echoed in her mind. What have I gotten myself into? Tomorrow, she would find out. She was not supposed to change her outfit 3 times. Ariana stared at her reflection, smoothing down the red dress she'd finally settled on, a deep burgundy number that hugged her curves and fell just below her knees. Alexander had said red looked good on her, and the memory of his voice saying those words sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. This was supposed to be simple, professional, a favor between colleagues. So why did she feel like she was getting ready for the most important date of her life? Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm neutrals and organized minimalism, felt different tonight. She'd lit a candle without thinking, then blown it out, worried it might send the wrong message. She'd rearranged the throw pillows twice, put on music, then turned it off, then turned it back on at a lower volume. By the time her doorbell rang at exactly 5:50 p.m., her nerves were stretched tighter than piano wire. She opened the door and forgot how to breathe. Alexander stood in her hallway looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Gone was the corporate suit, replaced by dark jeans that fit him perfectly, a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, and a wool coat that probably cost more than her rent. In one hand, he held a bouquet of white roses, elegant, expensive, and absolutely perfect for impressing her mother. But it was his face that made her heart stutter. He looked soft, approachable. The harsh lines that usually marked his expression had smoothed into something warmer, more human. "Hi," she managed, suddenly feeling ridiculous for overthinking everything. "Hi yourself." His green eyes traveled down her figure with an appreciation that felt entirely too real. "Red definitely looks good on you." Heat bloomed in her cheeks. "Thank you, you look good different," she added quickly. "Casual boyfriend attire," he said with a slight smile. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, hyper-aware of how his presence seemed to fill her small entryway. He handed her the roses, and their fingers brushed again, that same electric contact from the night before. "These are beautiful," she said, inhaling their delicate fragrance. "My mom will love them." "That's the idea." He glanced around her apartment, taking in the clean lines and warm lighting. "This is nice, very you." Something about the way he said it made her stomach flutter, like he'd been thinking about what her home might look like. "Can I get you something to drink before we go?" "Actually," he said, shrugging out of his coat, "I thought we should talk first. Go over our story." Right, their story. The fiction they were about to sell to her family. "Of course." She gestured toward the living room, placing the roses carefully on her kitchen counter. Very practical. He settled onto her sofa with the same controlled grace he brought to everything, but somehow he looked perfectly at home against her cream-colored cushions, like he belonged there. "So," he said as she perched on the opposite end of the couch, "how long have we been dating?" "I was thinking 3 months. Long enough to be serious, not so long that they'd expect an engagement ring." 3 months, he repeated thoughtfully. "That would put our first date in September." "September 15th, she said automatically, then felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, if we're being specific, September 15th. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. "Why that date?" "Because that's when you complimented my presentation in front of the entire executive board, and I went home that night feeling like I could conquer the world," she thought. "It seemed like a good day," she said instead. "Where did we go for our first date?" The question hung between them, and Ariana realized they were venturing into dangerous territory, creating fake memories that felt increasingly real with each detail. "Dinner," she said carefully. "Somewhere nice but not too fancy. You wanted to impress me but didn't want to overwhelm me." Smart strategy. His lips quirked upward. Did it work? The playful question caught her off guard. This wasn't Alexander Ford, CEO and her intimidating boss. This was someone else entirely, someone warmer, more accessible, someone who might actually date his data analyst. "I suppose you'll have to ask me again in a few hours, when you see how convincing an actor you are." "I'm not acting, Ariana." The words were spoken quietly, but they hit her like a lightning bolt. She looked up sharply, searching his face for clarification, but his expression had gone carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, leaning slightly closer, "if we're going to convince your family we're together, we need to be comfortable with each other. Really comfortable. Not performing comfort." Her mouth went dry. "And how do we do that?" Instead of answering, he held out his hand. "Come here." Every rational thought in her head screamed warnings, but she found herself moving closer, letting him pull her until she was sitting beside him, their thighs almost touching. "Better," he murmured, and his hand came up to gently brush a curl away from her face. "Your family is going to be watching us, looking for signs that we care about each other." His fingers lingered against her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch before she could stop herself. "They'll expect us to be natural together," he continued, his voice dropping to something softer, more intimate, comfortable with small touches, casual affection. "Casual affection," she repeated weakly, very aware of how his thumb was now tracing along her jawline. "Like this," he said, and leaned in to press a soft kiss to her forehead. It should have felt brotherly, friendly. Instead, it felt like a promise. "Alexander," she whispered, not entirely sure what she was asking. "I know," he said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. "I know this is complicated. We work together. We do. You're my boss. I am. This is supposed to be fake." "It is," he agreed, but his hand was still cupping her face, his thumb still moving in those maddening circles. "But fake doesn't mean we can't enjoy it." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight, made her wonder if she'd been blind to something that had been building between them for months. "What happens Monday?" she asked, needing to ground herself in reality. "Monday, we go back to work. Professional. Appropriate." His hand dropped away, and she immediately missed the contact. "But tonight we're whoever we need to be to make your family happy." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good," he said, standing and extending his hand. "Ready to go convince them I'm madly in love with you." As she placed her hand in his, feeling that now familiar spark of electricity, Ariana realized the most dangerous part wasn't convincing her family. It was convincing herself this was still pretend. "Let's go," she said, grabbing her coat and purse. But as they walked to his car, a sleek black BMW that screamed success, she caught him holding the passenger door open for her with such natural courtesy that her heart did a little flip. "Very boyfriend-like," she commented, as he slid into the driver's seat. "I'm a quick study," he replied, but there was something in his smile that suggested this wasn't studied at all. As they pulled away from her building, heading toward her parents' house in the suburbs, Ariana stole a glance at his profile. Strong jaw, confident hands on the steering wheel, the kind of casual elegance that came from years of success. In a few hours, she would introduce this man as her boyfriend. Her family would see them together, believe they were in love, probably start planning wedding showers. And the terrifying part was, it might not be entirely pretend. "Nervous?" Alexander asked, glancing over at her. "Terrified," she admitted. His hand found hers across the center console, warm and steady and reassuring. "It's going to be fine," he said softly. "Trust me." And as they drove through the twinkling lights of Chicago's Christmas decorations, toward a family dinner that would change everything, Ariana realized she did trust him, maybe more than she should. The moment Ariana's mother opened the front door, Alexander understood why his data analyst had been so nervous. Diane Lewis was a force of nature wrapped in a festive red apron, her warm brown eyes lighting up like Christmas morning as she took in the sight of her daughter's hand firmly clasped in his. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her gaze traveling from Alexander's face to the white roses in his free hand, then back again. "Ariana, honey, you didn't tell me he was so handsome." "Mom?" Ariana warned, but her cheeks were pink with what looked like genuine embarrassment rather than performance anxiety. Alexander stepped forward smoothly, releasing Ariana's hand to offer the flowers with a smile that came surprisingly naturally. "Mrs. Lewis, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Ariana talks about you constantly." It wasn't entirely a lie. In their 2 years of working together, he'd heard enough stories about her family's Sunday dinners and holiday traditions to feel like he knew them already. Diane clutched the roses to her chest like they were made of gold. "Oh, Alexander, they're beautiful. And please, call me Diane. Mrs. Lewis makes me feel ancient." "These are for you as well," he said, producing a bottle of wine from his coat. "Ariana mentioned you prefer reds." The look of pure delight that crossed Diane's face made something warm settle in Alexander's chest. When was the last time he'd made someone that happy with such a simple gesture? "James," Diane called over her shoulder, "come meet our daughter's mystery man." Ariana's father appeared in the hallway, a tall man with graying temples and kind eyes that assessed Alexander with the protective instincts of a father. His handshake was firm, testing. "Alexander Ford," he introduced himself, meeting James's gaze directly. "Thank you for having me in your home, sir." "Ford?" James repeated thoughtfully. "You wouldn't happen to be related to the Ford Technologies downtown?" Alexander felt Ariana tense beside him, but he kept his expression relaxed. "Actually, sir, I founded the company, but tonight I'm just Ariana's boyfriend." The way he said it, with genuine warmth and just a hint of pride, made Ariana's breath catch. He sounded like a man who was genuinely honored to hold that title. "Well, I'll be damned," James murmured, then caught his wife's warning look. "I mean, that's impressive, son." "Daddy," came a voice from the living room. "Stop interrogating the poor man before he's even gotten his coat off." Jasmine appeared in the doorway, and Alexander could immediately see the family resemblance. She had Ariana's intelligent eyes and graceful bearing, but where Ariana was composed and controlled, Jasmine radiated mischief. "You must be the sister I've heard so much about," Alexander said, allowing Ariana to help him out of his coat. "All good things, I hope," Jasmine replied, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. This was clearly the family member who would be hardest to convince. "Mostly," Alexander said with a perfectly straight face, then winked at Ariana. "She did mention you have a tendency to steal her clothes." Jasmine's laugh was surprised and genuine. "I like him already," she declared. "Come on, let me introduce you to the rest of the circus." The living room was warm and inviting, decorated with twinkling lights and family photos spanning decades. Extended family members were scattered across comfortable furniture, and conversations paused as Alexander and Ariana entered. "Everyone," Diane announced proudly, "this is Alexander." A chorus of greetings rose from the room, and Alexander found himself shaking hands and accepting hugs from aunts, uncles, and cousins. But his attention was drawn to one man, sitting in the corner armchair, younger than the others, with an expensive watch, and a calculating expression that immediately put Alexander on alert. "And this," Jasmine said with barely concealed disdain, "is our cousin Brandon." Brandon stood with the kind of swagger that came from inherited money rather than earned success. His handshake was deliberately too firm, his smile too bright. "So you're the mystery boyfriend," Brandon said, his tone friendly enough, but with an undercurrent that made Ariana step closer to Alexander. "Ariana's been keeping you quite the secret." "Good things are worth protecting," Alexander replied smoothly, his arm coming around Ariana's waist in a gesture that looked completely natural. The contact sent electricity through both of them, but they covered it well. "What do you do for work, Alexander?" Brandon continued, and there was something predatory in his tone. "I'm in tech," Alexander said simply, deliberately understating his role. "Tech, huh? That's nice. I'm in finance myself, investment banking, Goldman Sachs." The name-dropping was obvious, meant to establish dominance. Alexander had dealt with dozens of Brandon types in business, men who measured their worth by their ability to intimidate others. "That sounds interesting," Alexander said politely, his hand moving in soothing circles on Ariana's back. He could feel the tension in her shoulders and wanted to reassure her. "Oh, it is. Very lucrative. Of course, not everyone can handle the pressure." Brandon's eyes flicked dismissively to Ariana. "Some people prefer safer choices." The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Ariana's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the tension with surgical precision. "You're absolutely right," he said, his tone conversational but his eyes deadly cold. "Not everyone can handle real pressure. It takes a special kind of person to build something from nothing, to create rather than just manage other people's money." The room went quiet. Brandon's face flushed red as the implication hit home. "I'm sorry," Alexander continued with fake confusion. "Did you say you were an investment banker or an investment baker? Because honestly, either one sounds less challenging than what Ariana does every day." Jasmine barely stifled a snort of laughter. Several of the older relatives exchanged amused glances. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Alexander," Diane called from the kitchen, unknowingly rescuing them all from the mounting tension, "would you mind giving me a hand with something?" "Of course," he said immediately, pressing a kiss to Ariana's temple that felt entirely too natural. "I'll be right back, sweetheart." The endearment rolled off his tongue like he'd been saying it for years, and the way Ariana's eyes softened in response made several family members exchange knowing smiles. In the kitchen, Diane was pulling a massive turkey from the oven, but Alexander suspected she'd called him in for reasons beyond manual labor. "You handled that well," she said quietly, not looking at him as she basted the bird. "Brandon seems challenging. He's been sniffing around Ariana for years, Diane said, her voice tight with maternal frustration. Never understood why she couldn't see what a good man she had right in front of her. Now I see, she was just waiting for the right one. The faith in her voice made Alexander's chest tighten. This woman was trusting him with her daughter's happiness, believing in a love story that was supposed to be entirely fictional. Mrs. Lewis, Diane, she corrected, then turned to face him fully. Can I ask you something, Alexander? Of course. Do you make my daughter happy? The question was simple, direct, and loaded with a mother's protective instincts. Alexander found himself thinking of Ariana's smile when he'd complimented her presentation, the way she lit up when she talked about solving complex problems, the soft sound of her laughter echoing in his office late at night when they worked on difficult projects. Yes, he said quietly, and realized he meant it more than he should. I try to. Diane studied his face for a long moment, then smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her features. Good, she said simply. That's all I needed to know. When they returned to the living room carrying serving platters, Alexander found Ariana deep in conversation with her elderly grandmother, who was holding her hand and speaking in animated Spanish. Abuela approves, Jasmine whispered to him with amusement. She says you have good energy and strong hands for holding grandbabies. Alexander choked slightly on his wine. She said that? Abuela doesn't mess around, Ariana called from across the room, having overheard. Fair warning, she's already planning our wedding. The casual way she said it, the easy laughter in her voice, made something dangerous bloom in Alexander's chest. For a moment, he let himself imagine it, walking down an aisle toward Ariana in white, promising forever to someone who challenged him intellectually and made his pulse race with a simple smile. The fantasy was interrupted by Diane calling them all to dinner, but the image lingered as Alexander helped Ariana to her seat, his hand resting briefly on her lower back in a gesture that felt like muscle memory. As grace was said and wine was poured, as conversation flowed around the table like music, Alexander realized something that should have terrified him. This didn't feel like performance at all. It felt like coming home. The dining room glowed with warm candlelight and the soft twinkle of Christmas lights strung along the windows. Ariana found herself seated between Alexander and her grandmother, directly across from Brandon, who was still nursing his wounded pride from their earlier encounter. Ariana, sweetheart, her Aunt Gloria called from the other end of the table, tell us how you two met. The question they'd prepared for, but sitting here surrounded by her family's expectant faces, with Alexander's thigh pressed warm against hers under the table, Ariana found herself tongue-tied. Well, Alexander said smoothly, his hand finding hers on her lap. Technically we met at work, but our first real conversation happened in the elevator. Ariana looked at him in surprise. They hadn't discussed this detail. I was having the worst day, he continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm under the table, dealing with a client who seemed determined to make my life miserable, and Ariana got on at the 15th floor with this huge stack of reports. The memory he was describing was real. She remembered that day, remembered how frazzled he'd looked, how she'd almost said something but lost her nerve. The elevator got stuck between floors, Alexander said, his green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And instead of panicking like most people would, she just started talking about data patterns and probability outcomes and how every problem has a solution if you look at it from the right angle. Her family was listening with rapt attention, but Ariana was lost in Alexander's gaze, remembering that elevator ride differently now. Had he really been paying that much attention to her rambling about statistical analysis? By the time maintenance got us out, he finished softly, I knew I wanted to know everything about the woman who could make mathematical theories sound like poetry. The room erupted in appreciative sighs and knowing smiles, but Ariana barely heard them, because that elevator had been stuck for 43 minutes, and she had been talking about data analysis to fill the awkward silence. But the way Alexander was looking at her now, like she was something precious and unexpected, that's so romantic, Jasmine gushed. And then what happened? Then, Alexander said, his voice dropping to something more intimate, I spent 3 weeks trying to work up the courage to ask her to dinner. 3 weeks? Uncle Marcus laughed. What were you afraid of? Alexander's hand tightened slightly around Ariana's. That she'd say no. that I'd misread everything. That someone as brilliant and beautiful as Ariana could never be interested in someone like me. The confession was delivered so sincerely that even Ariana found herself believing it. The way his voice caught slightly on the word beautiful, the almost vulnerable expression in his eyes. If this was acting, he deserved an Oscar. Well, obviously she said yes. Diane beamed from her seat at the head of the table. And here we are, Alexander agreed, bringing Ariana's hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that made her toes curl in her shoes. That's disgusting, Jasmine's 8-year-old son piped up, making the adults laugh. Are you going to get married and have babies? Tyler, Jasmine scolded, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air like mistletoe, impossible to ignore. Well, Alexander said carefully, his eyes never leaving Ariana's face, when you find someone who makes you believe in forever, you don't want to waste time. The words were supposed to be part of their performance, but they landed with the weight of truth. Ariana felt her heart skip several beats. Forever, her grandmother murmured approvingly, in heavily accented English. This one, he knows what matters. Before anyone could probe deeper into their fictional future, James cleared his throat. Shall we say grace? The family joined hands around the table, and Ariana found herself caught between her grandmother's soft, wrinkled palm and Alexander's warm, strong fingers. As her father began the traditional blessing, she felt Alexander's thumb resume those maddening circles on her skin. For family, both born and chosen, James was saying, for love that surprises us when we least expect it, and for the blessings yet to come. Amen. Amen, the table chorused, but Alexander's hand lingered in hers for several heartbeats longer than necessary. As serving dishes were passed and conversation flowed, Ariana found herself studying Alexander's profile. He was listening to her father's story about fixing a neighbor's furnace with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention. When Aunt Gloria complimented the wine he'd brought, he gave full credit to the sommelier at his local shop, refusing to take the praise. This wasn't the corporate Alexander she knew, the man who could silence a boardroom with a single look. This was someone softer, more human, someone who helped her mother carry dishes to the kitchen without being asked, who laughed at her uncle's terrible jokes, who somehow remembered that her grandmother preferred to speak Spanish and made an effort to include her in conversations despite the language barrier. "You're staring," he murmured in her ear during a lull in the conversation, his breath warm against her skin. "Just admiring my boyfriend," she replied, the words coming out more breathless than she'd intended. Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, heat, something dangerous. "Careful, sweetheart, keep looking at me like that and your family's going to think we can't keep our hands off each other." "Can't we?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, bold and reckless and completely honest. Alexander's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his gaze sharpening on her face. "Ariana," he said quietly, a warning in his voice. "What?" Brandon's voice cut through their moment like a knife. "Sorry, didn't catch that." "Nothing important," Ariana said quickly, but she could feel heat climbing up her neck. "Alexander," Brandon continued with false friendliness, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about building something from nothing. What exactly did you build?" The question was clearly meant to put Alexander on the spot, to expose him as somehow less successful than he'd implied. Ariana felt her protective instincts flare. "Brandon," she started, but Alexander's hand on her thigh stopped her. "It's all right," he said calmly. "Ford Technologies. We specialize in data analytics and predictive modeling for corporate clients." "Ford Technologies," Brandon repeated slowly, his expression changing as recognition dawned. "Wait, Ford Technologies? As in the company that just signed the Morrison Group account? The $100 million deal that was in the Tribune?" Alexander's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "That's us." The table went quiet. Even Uncle Marcus, who usually dominated every conversation, was staring at Alexander with newfound respect. "Holy shit," Jasmine breathed, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "Sorry, Mom, but Alexander, you're like actually famous." "Hardly famous," Alexander said uncomfortably. "Just successful." "Successful?" Brandon laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Dude, you're like Chicago's youngest self-made millionaire. I read about you in Forbes." Ariana watched the shift in dynamics around the table. Suddenly, everyone was looking at Alexander differently, not just as her boyfriend, but as someone genuinely impressive, someone who could have anyone he wanted, someone who was supposedly choosing her. "Money isn't everything," Alexander said firmly, his hand finding hers again. "I'd rather have dinner with people who actually care about each other than eat caviar alone in a penthouse." The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, seemed to diffuse some of the tension. But Ariana could see the questions in her family's eyes. Why her? What could she possibly offer a man who had everything? "Besides," Alexander continued, his voice warming as he looked at her, "success doesn't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with. And I can't imagine sharing my life with anyone but Ariana." The declaration was made with such sincerity that even Ariana almost believed it. Almost believed that a man like Alexander Ford could look at her and see his future. "That's beautiful," Diane said softly, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "Mom, don't cry," Ariana laughed, but her own voice was thick with emotion. "I'm not crying," Diane protested. "I'm just happy. My baby girl found someone who sees how special she is." The words hit Ariana like a physical blow. Because that's what she'd always wanted, wasn't it? Someone who saw her worth, who chose her not in spite of her ambition and intelligence, but because of it. And sitting here with Alexander's hand warm in hers and his eyes soft with what looked like genuine affection, she could almost convince herself she'd found exactly that, even if it was all pretend. "Okay," she said, standing abruptly. "I think I need some air." She was out the back door before anyone could protest, stepping onto the small patio, where twinkling lights created a magical cocoon in the December darkness. The cold air hit her flushed cheeks like a slap, clearing some of the romantic fog from her head. This wasn't real. No matter how natural it felt, no matter how perfectly Alexander played the role of devoted boyfriend, this was all an elaborate performance. Come Monday morning, they'd be back to their professional relationship, and tonight would become just a strange memory. She heard the door open behind her and didn't need to turn around to know it was him. "You okay?" Alexander asked softly, coming to stand beside her at the patio railing. "Fine," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Just needed a moment." "Ariana." He turned toward her, his expression serious in the soft light. "Talk to me." "It's nothing, really. It's not nothing. You bolted from that table like the house was on fire." She laughed, but it sounded brittle even to her own ears. "It's just overwhelming, seeing them all fall for you so completely, watching them look at us like we're some kind of fairy tale. And that's bad because it's not real." The words exploded out of her with more force than she'd intended. "None of this is real, Alexander. Tomorrow you go back to being my boss, and I go back to being just another employee, and my family goes back to asking me why I'm still single." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the railing with white knuckles. "What if it didn't have to be?" he said finally, his voice so low she almost missed it. Ariana's heart stopped. "What?" He turned to face her fully, his green eyes intense and searching. "What if this didn't have to end tomorrow?" The question hung between them like a challenge, like a promise, like the most dangerous thing either of them had ever said. And in the warm glow of the Christmas lights, with her family's laughter drifting through the windows and Alexander's presence solid and reassuring beside her, Ariana realized she was standing at a crossroads that would change everything. Behind them, the door opened again. "Hey, lovebirds," Jasmine called with a grin. "Time for dessert. And Mom made her famous bread pudding, so you better get in here before Dad eats it all." The moment shattered like glass, but the question remained, hanging in the air between them as they returned to the warmth and light of the dining room. What if this didn't have to end? The bread pudding was warm and sweet, but Ariana couldn't taste it. She sat beside Alexander in the now familiar warmth of her family's dining room, hyper-aware of every breath he took, every casual gesture, every moment his arm brushed against hers. His question from the patio echoed in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. What if this didn't have to end tomorrow? "Alexander," her grandmother was saying in her careful English, "you have sisters? Brothers?" "No, Mom," he replied gently. "Just me." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "So you understand, precious. Only children, we know how special is family we choose. The words hit with unexpected weight. Ariana watched Alexander's expression soften as he looked around the table at her loud, loving, chaotic family. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm beginning to understand that." "Abuela," Jasmine interrupted with a mischievous grin, "stop interrogating the poor man. He's going to think we're all crazy." "Too late for that," Tyler chimed in from his booster seat. Uncle Brandon already scared him with the weird face he makes when he's angry. The table erupted in laughter, and even Brandon cracked a reluctant smile. The tension from earlier had mostly dissolved, replaced by the comfortable chaos of a family that had known each other's quirks for decades. "Speaking of weird faces," Aunt Gloria said with a wicked gleam in her eye, "has anyone shown Alexander the photo albums yet?" "No," Ariana said quickly, but it was too late. Her mother was already disappearing into the living room. "Mom, please," Ariana called after her. "Have mercy." "Oh, this is going to be good," Alexander murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you're afraid of seeing me with braces and a very unfortunate haircut from 7th grade. "I find that hard to imagine," he said, and something in his voice made her look at him sharply. "I bet you were beautiful even then." The compliment was delivered so naturally, so sincerely, that several family members exchanged knowing looks. But Ariana was too caught up in the way Alexander was looking at her, like he meant every word. Diane returned with a thick photo album, and suddenly everyone was crowding around as she flipped through pages of Ariana's childhood. School pictures, birthday parties, family vacations, a lifetime of memories spread across coffee-stained pages. "Oh God!" Ariana groaned as her mother stopped on a particularly mortifying photo from her awkward teenage years. "This is cruel and unusual punishment." "I think she's adorable," Alexander said, studying the photo with genuine interest. "Look at that smile. You can tell she's planning something. Probably how to hack into the school computer system," Jasmine added helpfully. "She was such a little nerd." "Still am," Ariana muttered, but Alexander's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Best kind of woman," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Beautiful, brilliant, and dangerous. Perfect combination." The casual way he said it, like it was absolute fact, made Ariana's chest tight with emotion. This man, this successful, impossibly attractive man, was sitting in her childhood dining room, calling her perfect in front of her entire family. And the terrifying part was how much she wanted to believe him. All right, James intervened with a chuckle. "I think we've embarrassed her enough for one evening." "Never enough," Diane protested, but she closed the album with obvious reluctance. As the evening wound down, family members began gathering their things and saying their goodbyes. Hugs were exchanged, plans were made for New Year's Eve, and promises to stay in touch were issued with the genuine warmth that only came from real affection. "Alexander," Diane said, pulling him into a fierce maternal hug, "you are welcome in this house any time, with or without this one," she added, jerking her thumb toward Ariana. "Thank you," he said, and Ariana could hear the emotion in his voice. "This has been wonderful, really. Good," Diane said firmly. "Because if you hurt my baby girl, I know where you live now." The threat was delivered with such sweet maternal menace that Alexander actually laughed. "Yes, Mom." Message received. Uncle Marcus clapped him on the shoulder with enough force to stagger a smaller man. "Take care of our girl, son." "I will," Alexander said, and the promise in his voice made Ariana's heart skip. Even Brandon, somewhat grudgingly, shook Alexander's hand. "Nice meeting you, man. Sorry if I was intense earlier." "No worries," Alexander replied graciously. "Protective family is a good thing." As the last of the relatives disappeared into the snowy night, Ariana found herself alone with Alexander in her parents' entryway, suddenly unsure what came next. "Well," she said awkwardly, "that was amazing," Alexander finished softly. "Your family is amazing, Ariana." "They liked you," she said, stating the obvious. "I mean, really liked you. Mom's probably already planning our wedding." "Would that be so terrible?" The question was asked quietly, but it hit like lightning. Ariana looked up to find Alexander watching her with an intensity that made her mouth go dry. "Alexander, I meant what I said on the patio," he continued, stepping closer, "about this not having to end tomorrow." "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "This was Tonight was the most real I've felt in years, he interrupted, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Sitting with your family, watching you laugh with your sister, seeing how your grandmother's face lit up when you spoke Spanish with her. This is who you really are, Ariana, and I want all of it. But we work together. You're my boss. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated, he said, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. But this, what we have, it doesn't feel complicated. It feels inevitable. Before she could respond, voices from the living room broke through their bubble of intimacy. Such a lovely couple, Aunt Gloria was saying. Did you see the way he looked at her? Like she hung the moon, Diane agreed with satisfaction. And the way she relaxed when he was touching her? That's real love right there. About time, James added gruffly. Girl's been working herself to death for years. She deserves someone who appreciates what he's got. Ariana felt heat flood her cheeks. Her family was discussing their relationship like it was real, permanent, destined, like Alexander was already part of the family tree. They can hear us, she whispered frantically. Good, Alexander said, his eyes never leaving her face. Let them hear this. And before she could ask what he meant, his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like the gentle, staged affection she'd expected. This was hungry, desperate, real. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer as his lips moved against hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. She could taste wine on his tongue, could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest, could hear the soft sound he made when she kissed him back with equal fervor. This wasn't performance. This wasn't fake. This was Alexander Ford kissing her like his life depended on it, in her parents' entryway, with her entire family listening from the next room. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the house had gone suspiciously quiet. Well, came her mother's voice from the living room, barely containing laughter. I guess that answers any questions about whether they're serious. 37 years old and still making out in the entryway like teenagers, James chuckled. I like him. Ariana buried her face against Alexander's chest, mortified and exhilarated in equal measure. She could feel his laughter rumbling under her cheek, could feel the way his arms tightened around her, like he never wanted to let her go. Your family definitely knows it's real now, he murmured against her hair. Is it? She asked, pulling back to search his face. Real, I mean. The vulnerability in her voice, the hope and fear warring in her expression, made something fierce and protective rise in Alexander's chest. Sweetheart, he said, the endearment coming as naturally as breathing. I haven't been acting for hours. The confession hung between them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. What do we do now? She whispered. Now, he said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I take you home. And tomorrow, we figure out how to make this work. And Monday? Monday I'll probably have to recuse myself from your performance reviews, he said with a slight smile. Conflict of interest. The practical consideration made her laugh, despite everything. Trust Alexander to think about corporate policy, even in the middle of a life-changing moment. Ariana, baby, Diane called from the living room. You two decent out there? Barely, Alexander called back, making Ariana gasp and swat his arm. Good, came James's voice, filled with paternal amusement. That's how it should be. As they gathered their coats and prepared to leave, as final hugs were exchanged and promises to call soon were made, Ariana felt like she was floating, the man holding her hand, helping her into his car, making sure her seatbelt was secure. This wasn't her boss anymore. This was Alexander, who made her family laugh and defended her honor and kissed her like she was precious. This was the man who might just be her forever. As they drove through the snowy Chicago streets, their hands intertwined on the center console, Ariana realized that sometimes the best love stories started with a lie, but they always ended with the truth. The snow was falling heavier now, creating a cocoon of intimacy inside Alexander's BMW as they navigated the quiet Chicago streets. The radio played soft jazz, but the real music was in the silence between them, charged with possibility and the echoes of that kiss. Ariana stole glances at Alexander's profile in the soft glow of the dashboard lights. His jaw was relaxed, his usual corporate tension nowhere to be found. This was the man who had charmed her grandmother, who had defended her honor, who had kissed her like she was his entire world. You're staring again, he said softly. his eyes never leaving the road. "I'm processing," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "This evening didn't exactly go according to plan." "Which part? The part where your family adopted me, or the part where I couldn't keep my hands off you?" The casual admission made her stomach flutter. "Both, I guess." They stopped at a red light and Alexander turned to face her fully. In the soft light, his green eyes looked almost vulnerable. "Ariana," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. That kiss, what happened back there, it wasn't about the performance anymore." "I know," she whispered, and realized she meant it. "I could feel the difference." The light turned green, but he held her gaze for another heartbeat before driving on. "Your grandmother said something tonight that stuck with me," he continued, "about family we choose. I've spent so many years focused on building my company, on success, that I forgot about building a life." She watched him navigate through a particularly snowy intersection, noting the careful way he drove, always thinking of her safety even in conversation. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm sitting in a car with the most incredible woman I've ever met, and I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to wake up next to her every morning." The confession was delivered so simply, so honestly, that it took her breath away. This wasn't corporate Alexander with his measured words and strategic thinking. This was just Alexander, raw and real, and terrifyingly sincere. "That's a dangerous thought," she managed. "The most dangerous," he agreed, pulling into the parking garage beneath her building. "Because now that I've had it, I can't seem to stop." They sat in the sudden quiet of the parked car, the engine ticking as it cooled. Outside, snow continued to fall against the concrete walls of the garage, but inside their small space, the air felt thick with unspoken possibilities. "Alexander," she said carefully, "what happens now?" "Really?" He turned in his seat to face her, one hand reaching out to tuck a curl behind her ear. The gentle touch made her shiver. "Now," he said, "I walk you to your door like a gentleman, and then I go home and try to figure out how to convince my brilliant, beautiful employee to take a chance on her impossible boss." What if she's already convinced? The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander's hand stilled against her cheek, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "Are you?" he asked, his voice rough with hope and want. Instead of answering, she leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was different from the one in her parents' entryway, softer, more deliberate, but no less devastating. She could feel him holding back, trying to be gentlemanly, and it made her want to break down every careful wall he'd constructed. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "We should go upstairs," she said quietly. "Ariana." There was warning in his voice, and something that might have been fear. "I'm not asking you to stay," she clarified, though part of her desperately wanted to. "I'm asking you to walk me to my door." Like you said, the relief in his expression was almost comical. "Right. Door. I can do door." They rode the elevator to her floor in charged silence, their hands linked but both carefully avoiding eye contact. When the doors opened, Alexander followed her down the familiar hallway, his presence warm and solid behind her. At her door, she fumbled with her keys, hyper-aware of his proximity. When she finally got the door open, she turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said softly, "for tonight, for everything." "Thank you for trusting me with them," he replied. "Your family they're special, Ariana. You're special." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. "So what happens Monday?" she asked, echoing her earlier question but with different meaning now. "Monday," he said, stepping closer, "I talk to HR about conflict of interest policies. I figure out how to recuse myself from your direct reporting structure without making it obvious to the entire company that I'm completely gone for one of my employees." "Gone for her?" she repeated, her heart hammering. "Completely," he confirmed, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Utterly, embarrassingly gone for her. That could be complicated," she pointed out, but she was smiling now. "I told you," he said, his thumb tracing her lower lip with maddening gentleness. "Everything worth having is complicated, and I'm worth having." "Sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate, "you're worth everything." The declaration hit her like lightning, making her knees weak and her resolve crumble. Before she could stop herself, she was rising on her toes, her hands fisting in his sweater, pulling him down for another kiss. This time he didn't hold back. His mouth crashed against hers with a hunger that had been building all evening, his hands tangling in her hair as he pressed her back against her door. She could feel the solid weight of him against her, could taste the wine and want on his lips, could hear the soft sound he made when she bit gently at his lower lip. "Ariana," he breathed against her mouth, her name like a prayer. "I know," she whispered back, because she did know. This was dangerous territory, the kind of kiss that led to crossed lines and morning regrets. But she couldn't bring herself to care. Alexander seemed to come to his senses first, pulling back with visible effort, his breathing ragged. "I should go," he said, but his hands were still in her hair, his body still pressed close to hers. "You should," she agreed, but made no move to step away. "If I don't go now," he started, then stopped, his jaw clenching with the effort of control. "What?" she prompted, even though she knew she was playing with fire. "If I don't go now, I'm going to carry you inside and spend the rest of the night showing you exactly how not fake my feelings are for you." The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. She could see the want in his eyes, the barely leashed desire that matched her own. "Alexander," she whispered, and he closed his eyes like her voice was torture. "Say good night, Ariana," he said roughly. "Please." The please broke her heart and saved them both. Because as much as she wanted him, as much as every nerve in her body was screaming for her to invite him inside, she knew he was right. They needed time to process, to figure out how to navigate this new reality. "Good night, Alexander," she said softly. He pressed one last kiss to her forehead, lingering and tender before stepping back. "Good night, sweetheart, sweet dreams." She watched him walk away, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his shoulders tense with the effort of leaving. Only when the elevator doors closed behind him did she slip inside her apartment, leaning back against the door with her heart still racing. Her apartment felt different now, charged with the memory of his presence. She could still smell his cologne in the air, could still feel the ghost of his touch on her skin. Moving through her evening routine like a woman in a dream, she found herself replaying every moment of the night. Alexander charming her family, defending her against Brandon, holding her hand during grace, telling stories that made her feel seen and valued and precious. And that kiss, dear God, that kiss. As she finally slipped into bed, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Thank you for tonight, for your family, for your trust, for being exactly who you are. Sleep well, Alexander." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you for making it feel real, even when it wasn't supposed to be." His response came immediately. "It was always real, sweetheart. I just needed a Christmas miracle to admit it." Ariana set her phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing despite the late hour. Tomorrow, everything would change. They would have to figure out how to navigate a relationship that had started as deception and turned into something that felt like destiny. But tonight, she was just a woman who had been kissed senseless by a man who looked at her like she hung the moon, a man who had defended her honor, charmed her family, and made her believe in fairy tales again. As sleep finally claimed her, one thought echoed in her mind. Sometimes the best love stories started with a lie, but they always ended with the truth. And the truth was, she was falling for Alexander Ford, hard. Ariana woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows, and the disorienting feeling that the world had shifted on its axis overnight. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, and wondering if the previous evening had been an elaborate dream. But then she saw Alexander's text message still glowing on her phone screen, and the memory of his mouth on hers came flooding back with devastating clarity. "It was always real, sweetheart. I just needed a Christmas miracle to admit it." She read the words again, her heart doing that fluttery thing it had been doing since he'd first touched her hand in his office. Alexander Ford, her boss, her impossible, brilliant, devastatingly attractive boss, had feelings for her, real feelings. And she was absolutely terrified. Her phone buzzed with a new message, and she nearly dropped it in her haste to check. "Good morning, beautiful. I hope you slept better than I did. Any chance you're free for coffee this morning? We should probably talk. Alexander." The message was perfectly polite, perfectly reasonable, but she could read between the lines The uncertainty, the need for reassurance that last night hadn't been some Christmas-induced madness they'd both regret in daylight. She typed back quickly before she could lose her nerve. "Good morning, coffee sounds perfect. My usual place on Maple Street. Give me an hour." His response was immediate. "I'll be there. And Ariana, don't overthink this. Some things are worth the risk." An hour later, Ariana walked into the Daily Grind, her neighborhood coffee shop that had become her weekend sanctuary. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a soft burgundy sweater. Casual but flattering, the kind of outfit that said she cared without trying too hard. Alexander was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming mugs in front of him. He'd beaten her there and ordered her usual, a vanilla latte with an extra shot, no foam. The fact that he remembered her coffee order made something warm unfurl in her chest. He looked different in daylight, in civilian clothes, less intimidating, more human. His dark hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his fingers through it, and he was wearing a navy sweater that brought out the green in his eyes. "Hi," she said softly as she approached the table. "Hi yourself," he replied, standing to pull out her chair with the same casual courtesy that had charmed her family. "You look beautiful." "It's Saturday morning," she protested. "I look like I rolled out of bed." "Exactly," he said, his eyes warm with something that made her stomach flutter. "Beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both wrapping their hands around their mugs like anchors in a storm. "So," Ariana said finally, "this is happening." "This is happening," Alexander agreed. "How are you feeling about that?" She studied his face, looking for signs of regret or second thoughts, but found only patient attention and something that looked like hope. "Terrified," she admitted. "Excited, confused, all at the same time." "Good," he said, surprising her. "If you weren't scared, it wouldn't be worth it. Is that your business philosophy? Take on the terrifying opportunities?" "It's my life philosophy," he said seriously. "The best things I've ever done scared me senseless first. Starting your company, definitely moving to Chicago, hiring you actually." That made her laugh. "Hiring me scared you?" "Terrified me," he confirmed with a slight smile. "You walked into that interview with your perfect resume and your brilliant mind, and I knew immediately that you were going to change everything. I just didn't know how much." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "Alexander, I need you to know something," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Last night wasn't about proximity or Christmas magic or playing a role too well. I've been fighting feelings for you for months." "Months? Remember the Harrison presentation? Back in September?" She nodded. The Harrison Group had been a major account, and she'd spent weeks preparing data projections for Alexander's pitch. "You stayed late to help me practice, and at one point you fell asleep on the conference room couch. I found myself just watching you, thinking about how peaceful you looked, how much I wanted to be the kind of man who got to take care of you." The confession was delivered quietly, but it hit her like a lightning bolt. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you're my employee, because it was inappropriate, because I was afraid you'd think I was just another executive abusing his power." His jaw tightened. "Because I was terrified you'd quit, and the thought of not seeing you every day was unbearable." Ariana set down her coffee mug with shaking hands. "Alexander, I know it's complicated," he continued. "I know there are rules and policies and a dozen reasons why this is a terrible idea. But last night, watching you with your family, seeing how you light up when you're really happy, I realized that some things are more important than convenient." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "that I'd rather figure out how to make this work than spend another day pretending I don't want you." The simple touch of his fingers against hers sent electricity shooting up her arm. She looked down at their joined hands, his larger, slightly rough from weekend workouts, hers smaller and darker against his pale skin. They looked right together. "People will talk," she said quietly. "Let them. HR will have a field day. I'll handle HR. The power dynamic will be addressed," he said firmly. "Properly, professionally, and immediately. I won't be your direct supervisor anymore, Ariana. Whatever this becomes, it happens between equals." She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her mouth go dry. "You've thought about this?" "A lot. I didn't sleep much last night," he admitted. I spent most of it figuring out how to restructure the entire analytics department so we could date without ethical complications. The casual way he said date made her heart skip. You restructured a department? For me? I'd restructure the entire company for you, he said simply. I'd restructure my whole life for you. The declaration was so honest, so completely without artifice, that it took her breath away. This wasn't smooth corporate Alexander with his strategic thinking and measured responses. This was a man laying his heart on the table. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane, he agreed. But crazy doesn't always mean wrong. Around them, the coffee shop buzzed with weekend activity. Families with small children, college students hunched over laptops, couples sharing newspapers and inside jokes. It was ordinary, normal, real. And somehow that made what was happening between them feel more precious, more possible. If we do this, she said carefully, if we try to make this work, what does that look like? It looks like taking it one day at a time, he said. It looks like me asking you on a proper first date, somewhere that isn't your parents' dining room. It looks like figuring out how to be together without compromising your career or my company. And if it doesn't work out, something flickered across his expression, vulnerability, fear, hope. Then we'll handle it like adults. But Ariana, I have a feeling it's going to work out beautifully. The confidence in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and worth fighting for, made her decision for her. Okay, she said softly. Okay, okay, let's try this. Let's be completely insane together. The smile that spread across Alexander's face was radiant, transforming his features from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. In that case, he said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, Ariana Lewis, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere that serves food that isn't cooked by your mother, where I can spend the entire evening staring at you without your sister making commentary. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I would love to. Good, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, because I've been wanting to take you somewhere special for months. I just never had the excuse. And now you do? Now I have the best excuse in the world, he said softly. I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you. The words hung between them like a gift, unexpected and perfect and absolutely true. And as Ariana looked into Alexander's green eyes, seeing her own feelings reflected back at her, she realized that sometimes the best love stories didn't start with love at first sight. Sometimes they started with a desperate lie that became the most honest thing two people had ever shared. Alexander, she said quietly, I think I might be falling in love with you too. Might be? He asked, his smile widening. Okay, she amended, feeling brave and reckless and absolutely certain. I am definitely falling in love with you. Good, he said, lifting their joined hands to press another kiss to her fingers, because I plan to catch you. And sitting in that ordinary coffee shop on an extraordinary Saturday morning, with snow still falling outside and the promise of dinner ahead of them, Ariana believed he would. Ariana had been on dozens of first dates in her life, but none had ever made her hands shake while applying lipstick. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 o'clock that evening, she took a steadying breath and tried to calm her racing heart. This was Alexander, her boss, the man who had charmed her family and kissed her senseless and told her he loved her over morning coffee, the man who was picking her up in 30 minutes for their first official date. She'd chosen a deep emerald dress that hugged her curves and brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she kept her makeup elegant but understated. She wanted to look beautiful for him, but more than that, she wanted to look like herself. Her phone buzzed with a text. On my way up, you're going to take my breath away, aren't you? Before she could respond, her doorbell rang. Ariana smoothed her dress one final time, grabbed her clutch and opened the door. Alexander stood in her hallway looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Gone was the casual weekend wear from that morning, replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and long legs. His dark hair was styled, his jaw freshly shaved, and he was holding a single red rose. Wow, he said softly, his green eyes traveling over her with obvious appreciation. I was right. Breathtaking. You don't look so bad yourself, she managed, accepting the rose with fingers that trembled slightly. Very CEO-like. Is that good or bad for a first date? Depends, she said, stepping closer to adjust his already perfect tie. Are you planning to negotiate any deals tonight? Just one, he said, his voice dropping to something intimate and warm. Trying to convince the most amazing woman I know to give me a second date. The simple honesty in his words made her stomach flutter. I think your chances are pretty good. Good to know, he said, offering his arm. Shall we? The restaurant Alexander had chosen was perfect, intimate without being stuffy, elegant without being pretentious. Chez Laurent was tucked away on a quiet street in Lincoln Park, the kind of place that felt like a well-kept secret. How did you find this place? Ariana asked as they were seated at a corner table lit by flickering candles. I've been saving it, Alexander admitted, his eyes soft in the candlelight, for someone special. How long have you been saving it? About 2 years, he said, and something in his tone made her look at him more closely. Since the day you started working for me, actually. The confession hit her like lightning. Alexander, I'm not trying to pressure you, he said quickly. I've been hoping for this longer than you know. The waiter appeared to take their wine order, giving Ariana a moment to process. 2 years. He'd been thinking about taking her on a date for 2 years. The Bordeaux sounds lovely, Alexander was saying to the waiter, but his eyes never left her face. And could you give us a few more minutes with the menu? When they were alone again, Ariana leaned forward slightly. Tell me something I don't know about you. What would you like to know? Anything. Everything. She gestured around the restaurant. This feels different from work. I want to know who you are when you're not being the CEO. Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering. I wanted to be a teacher, he said finally. A teacher. Mathematics. I love the way numbers tell stories, the way equations can solve real problems. I thought I'd end up in some university classroom, helping students see the beauty in calculus. What changed your mind? Reality, mostly. My father died when I was 22, left my mother with massive medical debt. Teaching wasn't going to pay that off fast enough. He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. So I took everything I knew about mathematical modeling and built a company around it. The vulnerability in his admission made her chest tight. Do you ever regret it? I used to, he said honestly, until I hired a brilliant data analyst who made me remember why I loved mathematics in the first place. Their wine arrived, providing another moment of pause. After the waiter left, Ariana raised her glass. To unexpected career paths, she said. To finding exactly what you didn't know you were looking for, he countered, clinking his glass against hers. The wine was perfect, rich and warm, but Ariana barely tasted it. She was too caught up in watching Alexander's face in the candlelight, in the way he listened to her stories with complete attention, in the way he laughed at her jokes like they were the funniest things he'd ever heard. Your turn, he said, after she'd told him about her disastrous attempt at learning to cook in college. Tell me something I don't know. I used to want to be a journalist, she said, surprising herself with the admission. Investigative reporting. I wanted to uncover corruption, expose wrongdoing, change the world one story at a time. What happened? I took a statistics class to fulfill a math requirement and fell in love with data analysis. Turns out, I prefer finding patterns in numbers to finding patterns in human behavior. Less messy? Much less messy, she agreed. Numbers don't lie or have hidden agendas. Unlike people? Unlike people, she confirmed, then paused. Present company excluded, of course. Of course, he said with a smile that made her toes curl, though I should probably confess that I have several hidden agendas where you're concerned, such as making you laugh at least once every day, finding excuses to work late so I can see you in the soft light of the office after everyone else has gone home, figuring out how to ask you out without getting sued for sexual harassment. Each confession was delivered with careful honesty, and Ariana felt herself melting a little more with each word. Well, she said, her voice slightly breathless, mission accomplished on all counts. Dinner arrived, perfectly prepared duck for him, sea bass for her, but the food seemed almost secondary to the conversation flowing between them. They talked about books and movies and travel dreams, about childhood memories and future goals, and everything in between. How you know what's funny? Alexander said as they shared a decadent chocolate dessert. I've eaten at business dinners in restaurants all over the world, but I can't remember enjoying a meal this much in years. Good company, she suggested. The best company, he confirmed, his foot finding hers under the table in a gesture so casually intimate it made her breath catch. When the check came, Alexander handled it with the smooth efficiency she'd come to expect, but there was nothing corporate about the way he helped her into her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders just a moment longer than necessary. "Walk with me?" he asked as they stepped outside into the crisp December air. The restaurant was only a few blocks from the lakefront, and they strolled slowly toward the water, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Christmas lights twinkled in the windows of the townhouses they passed, and the whole world felt magical and full of possibility. "Alexander," Ariana said as they reached the shore, where the lake stretched out dark and infinite before them, "can I ask you something? Anything. Are you sure about this? About us? Because if you're having second thoughts—" He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the soft glow of the streetlights. "Ariana," he said, his hands coming up to frame her face, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. But the complications will be worth it," he said firmly. "You're worth it. This is worth it. How do you know?" "Because," he said, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones, "I've spent 2 years watching you work, seeing how your brilliant mind processes problems, witnessing your kindness and your strength and your incredible heart. And last night, meeting your family, seeing you in your element, I realized I wasn't just attracted to you, Ariana. I was home." The confession was so honest, so completely without artifice, that it took her breath away. "Home?" she whispered. "Home," he confirmed. "That feeling of rightness, of belonging somewhere. I haven't felt that since my mother died 5 years ago, but with you, with your family, it all came rushing back." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Alexander, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "I know it's complicated and messy and probably terrifying, but I also know that what we have is real and rare and worth fighting for." Instead of responding with words, she rose on her toes and kissed him. This kiss was different from all the others, softer, more deliberate, infused with promise rather than desperation. It tasted like wine and chocolate and the future, like coming home after a long journey. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean I get that second date?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Alexander Ford," she said, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You can have as many dates as you want." "Good," he said, pulling her closer, "because I'm thinking in terms of forever." As they stood there on the shore of Lake Michigan, with the city twinkling behind them and the promise of tomorrow ahead, Ariana realized that sometimes love didn't announce itself with fireworks and dramatic music. Sometimes it crept up slowly, disguised as friendship and professional respect and admiration, until one day you looked across a conference table and realized that the person sitting there wasn't just your colleague, he was your future. "Forever sounds perfect," she whispered against his lips, and as he kissed her again under the stars, Ariana knew that their love story was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp December clarity that made everything feel possible and terrifying in equal measure. Ariana stood in front of her closet at 6:30 a.m., staring at her professional wardrobe with new eyes. Everything felt different now, her clothes, her apartment, her entire world, because somewhere across the city, Alexander Ford was probably getting ready for the same workday, and they would have to figure out how to navigate their new reality in the place where it all began. She chose her navy blue suit with the fitted blazer, professional, confident, but with the silk blouse underneath that made her feel beautiful. If she was going to face whatever came next, she wanted to feel like herself. Her phone buzzed as she was applying lipstick. "Good morning, beautiful. Ready to change the corporate world?" Alexander. Despite her nerves, she smiled. Even in a text message, he managed to make her feel brave. "Ready as I'll ever be. See you in there, Mr. Ford." "Looking forward to it, Ms. Lewis." And Ariana, "Whatever happens today, we face it together." The promise in those words carried her through the commute, through the elevator ride to the 32nd floor, through the familiar routine of settling at her desk with coffee and the morning reports. Everything looked the same. The gleaming floors, the glass-walled offices, the quiet efficiency of Ford Technologies in the early morning hours. But Ariana felt like she was seeing it all for the first time, hyper-aware that this was the place where she'd fallen in love without even realizing it. "You look different," came a voice behind her. Ariana turned to find Imani Harris, her closest colleague, studying her with curious eyes. "Different how?" Ariana asked, hoping her voice sounded normal. "Glowing," Imani said with a grin. "Like you had an amazing weekend. Please tell me you finally went on a date with someone who isn't intimidated by your brain." If only she knew, Ariana thought. "Something like that," she said carefully. "Details," Imani demanded, perching on the edge of Ariana's desk. "I need to live vicariously through someone's love life." Before Ariana could figure out how to respond without lying, the elevator chimed, and Alexander stepped onto the floor. Even from across the room, Ariana felt the familiar spark of electricity. He looked perfectly corporate in his charcoal suit and burgundy tie, but she could see traces of the man who had kissed her under the stars, in the slight smile playing at his lips, in the way his eyes found hers immediately and held them for just a beat longer than appropriate. "Morning, Alexander," Imani called cheerfully. "You look like you had a good weekend too." "I did, thank you," he replied, his voice professionally neutral but his gaze still locked on Ariana. "Ms. Lewis, could I see you in my office when you have a moment? I'd like to discuss the Morrison Group account projections." "Of course," Ariana managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I'll be right there." As Alexander disappeared into his office, Imani nudged her with obvious delight. "He used your last name. He never uses last names. He's totally checking you out." "He is not," Ariana protested, but she could feel heat climbing up her neck. "Oh, honey," Imani laughed, "he absolutely is. And judging by the way you're blushing, you're not exactly opposed to the idea." If she only knew how not opposed Ariana was to the idea. "I should go," Ariana said, gathering the Morrison Group files. "Don't want to keep the boss waiting." "The boss who's totally checking you out," Imani called after her with a grin. Ariana knocked on Alexander's office door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Come in," came his voice, and she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Alexander was standing with his back to her, looking out at the Chicago skyline, his hands clasped behind him, in a pose she recognized as his thinking position. "The Morrison Group account?" she asked softly. He turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Gone was the professional mask he'd worn in front of Imani. This was the man who had told her he loved her, who had kissed her like she was precious, who had promised her forever. "I've been thinking," he said, moving toward her with that controlled grace she found so attractive. "About us, about this, and I've made some calls." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." The formal tone made her nervous, but she settled into the familiar chair where she'd sat for dozens of meetings over the past 2 years. Alexander took his place behind his desk, but somehow the distance felt charged rather than professional. "I spoke with HR this morning," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "And with the board." Ariana's heart stopped. "Alexander, what did you tell them?" "I told them that I've developed feelings for an employee and that I need to recuse myself from any supervisory role to avoid conflicts of interest." "You what?" She stared at him in shock. "Alexander, your career—" "My career will be fine," he said firmly. "But more importantly, so will yours. Effective immediately, you'll be reporting directly to Simone Hurd, our VP of Operations. Your responsibilities will remain the same. Your salary will remain the same, but I will no longer be your direct supervisor." The magnitude of what he'd done hit her like a physical blow. "You restructured your entire management chain. For me. For us," he corrected. "Because what we have is worth protecting, and I won't have anyone questioning your professional achievements or suggesting that your success came from anything other than your brilliant mind and incredible work ethic." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Alexander, there's more." He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "I've also asked Simone to fast-track your promotion. Senior data analyst, with a team reporting to you and a salary that reflects your true value to this company." "A promotion?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "A promotion you earned 6 months ago, but I was too selfish to recommend because it would have meant transferring you to a different department. I wouldn't have gotten to see you every day." His smile was rueful. "Turns out I was an idiot who was sabotaging both our careers." Ariana felt tears spill over. "You're giving me everything I've wanted professionally, because you deserve everything," he said simply. "And because I love you too much to let our relationship compromise your dreams." She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where he'd been standing moments before. The city stretched out below them, full of possibility and promise, but all she could think about was the man behind her, who was willing to restructure his entire company for her happiness. "People will still talk," she said quietly. "Let them talk." His voice was closer now, and she turned to find him standing right behind her. "Ariana, I don't care what people say. I care about you. About us, about building something real and lasting and worth all the complications. What if it doesn't work out?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "What if we mess this up?" "Then we'll handle it like adults," he said, echoing his words from Saturday morning. "But sweetheart, look at me." She turned, and he cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "Do you remember what you told me about data analysis, about how patterns tell stories?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "We have 2 years of patterns, Ariana. 2 years of working together seamlessly, of challenging each other, of bringing out the best in each other professionally. 2 years of friendship and respect and genuine affection that grew into something deeper." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "Those are good patterns. That's a love story worth believing in." "Alexander," she whispered, and he kissed her. It was a soft kiss, gentle and reassuring and full of promise. When they broke apart, Ariana felt like she could conquer the world. "So," she said, straightening his already perfect tie, "what do we do now?" "Now," he said with a grin that transformed his features from corporate handsome to absolutely devastating. "I take you to lunch, as colleagues celebrating your promotion. And tonight, I take you to dinner. As the man who's completely in love with you and wants to hear all about your first day in your new position." "What about right now?" she asked, suddenly feeling bold and reckless and absolutely certain. "Right now," he said, his voice dropping to something intimate and warm. "I tell you that I love you, and you tell me that you love me too, and we start the first day of the rest of our lives." "I love you," she said without hesitation. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and the way you make me feel like I can do anything." "You can do anything," he said seriously. "You're going to change the world, Ariana Lewis, and I'm going to be there cheering you on." A knock on the door interrupted them, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. "Come in," Alexander called, settling behind his desk with impressive composure. Imani peered around the door with obvious curiosity. "Sorry to interrupt, but Simone Hurd is here to see Ariana. Something about a promotion." Ariana exchanged a look with Alexander, seeing her own joy reflected in his eyes. "Tell her I'll be right there," Ariana said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As Imani disappeared, Alexander stood and moved toward her again. "Ready to start your new life?" he asked softly. "With you." She reached up to straighten his tie one more time, a gesture that felt like muscle memory. "I'm ready for anything." "Good," he said, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead, "because we're going to be extraordinary together." As Ariana left his office to meet with her new supervisor and discuss her promotion, she caught sight of Imani watching with undisguised delight. "You two are terrible at hiding whatever this is," Imani called in a stage whisper. "Hiding what?" Ariana asked innocently. "The fact that you're absolutely crazy about each other," Imani grinned. "But don't worry, your secret's safe with me." As Ariana walked toward her new future, professional and personal, she realized that some secrets were meant to be revealed, some lies were meant to become truth, and some love stories were meant to start in the most unexpected places, like a fake Christmas boyfriend arrangement that turned into the most real thing either of them had ever experienced. Behind her, she could hear Alexander on a conference call, his voice confident and strong, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, because that's what people in love did. They chose each other, again and again, no matter what. With careers protected and love declared, Ariana and Alexander have successfully navigated from deception to truth, from colleagues to partners, from fake to forever. But their story isn't over yet. The epilogue awaits, promising a glimpse into their beautiful future together. 1 year later, December 24th, 1 year later, the snow was falling gently outside the windows of Alexander and Ariana's shared apartment, creating the same magical atmosphere that had started their love story exactly 1 year ago. But everything else had changed in the most beautiful ways. Ariana stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying the same red lipstick she'd worn to that first Christmas dinner. But this time she wasn't nervous. This time, she was going home as herself. Senior data analyst Ariana Lewis, the woman who had revolutionized Ford Technologies' predictive modeling department, the woman who had been featured in Chicago Business Weekly as one of the city's rising stars under 30. More importantly, she was going home as the woman who woke up every morning in Alexander Ford's arms, who had learned that love didn't have to be complicated when it was right. "You ready, sweetheart?" Alexander's voice came from the bedroom, warm and familiar and still capable of making her stomach flutter after a year of hearing it every day. "Almost," she called back, taking one last look at her reflection. The woman staring back at her was radiant, confident, completely at peace with who she had become. Gone were the shadows of uncertainty that had plagued her a year ago. In their place was the glow of someone who had found her perfect match in both love and life. She emerged from the bathroom to find Alexander adjusting his tie in front of the full-length mirror, looking devastatingly handsome in a navy suit that brought out his green eyes. Some things never changed. He was still the most attractive man she'd ever seen, still had the power to make her pulse race with a simple smile. "You look incredible," he said, turning to face her with the expression of wonder that had never faded from his eyes when he looked at her. "So do you," she replied, moving to straighten his already perfect tie out of habit. "Ready to face the Lewis family inquisition about wedding plans?" Alexander laughed, the sound rich and warm in their cozy bedroom. "After surviving your cousin Brandon's attempts to one-up me for an entire year, I think I can handle your mother asking when she gets to plan our engagement party." "About that," Ariana said, suddenly feeling nervous for the first time in months. "About what?" Alexander asked, his hands settling on her waist with the natural intimacy that had developed between them. Instead of answering, she reached into her jewelry box and pulled out a small velvet box that made Alexander's eyes widen. "Ariana," he breathed. "What?" "Alexander Ford," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You taught me that some things are worth the risk. You showed me that love doesn't follow corporate policies or convenient timelines. You made me believe that the best things in life happen when you're brave enough to reach for them." His hands tightened on her waist, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like hope and joy and complete adoration. "You've spent a year putting my career first, my dreams first, my happiness first," she continued, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant men's wedding band. "So, I'm asking you, will you marry me, Alexander? Will you let me spend the rest of my life putting you first?" The silence stretched between them for exactly 3 heartbeats before Alexander swept her into his arms, spinning her around their bedroom while laughing with pure joy. "Yes," he said, setting her down and framing her face with hands that trembled slightly. "Yes, of course, yes. Though I should probably mention..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own small velvet box, this one containing a stunning solitaire diamond that caught the light like captured starfire. "I was planning to ask you the same question tonight," he said with a grin that could have powered the entire city. "After dinner in front of your family so your grandmother could start planning our wedding immediately." Ariana laughed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Great minds think alike? Great hearts beat as one," he corrected, slipping the engagement ring onto her finger with hands that were reverent and sure. "Ariana Lewis, will you marry me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, absolutely, yes." Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, tasting like future and forever, and the kind of love that poets wrote about. When they broke apart, both laughing through happy tears, Alexander held up his hand so she could slide his ring into place. "So," he said, admiring the way the wedding band looked on his finger, "I guess we're engaged." "Doubly engaged," she agreed. "Think your shareholders will approve?" "My shareholders can kiss my ass," he said cheerfully. "I'm marrying the woman I love, the woman who makes me better at everything I do, the woman who turned a fake Christmas boyfriend into the luckiest man in Chicago." "Chicago?" she teased. "Just Chicago?" The world, he amended, pulling her close again. The luckiest man in the world. An hour later they stood on the familiar front porch of the Lewis family home, both wearing engagement rings and matching expressions of nervous excitement. "Ready to tell them?" Alexander asked, squeezing her hand. "Ready to make your grandmother the happiest woman in Illinois?" Ariana countered. "She's going to cry," Alexander warned. "She's going to plan our entire wedding before dessert," Ariana added. "I love your family," he said seriously, "almost as much as I love you." "Good," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him one more time before they faced the chaos, "because you're stuck with all of us now." The door opened before they could knock, revealing Diane Lewis in all her maternal glory, her face lighting up like Christmas morning when she saw their joined hands. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, then called over her shoulder, "James, get the camera. Our babies are engaged." The house erupted in cheers and congratulations, with family members appearing from every room to embrace them and admire the rings and demand to hear every detail of the proposal. "Both of you proposed?" Jasmine laughed. "That's the most you two thing ever. When's the wedding?" Aunt Gloria wanted to know. "Where's the wedding?" Uncle Marcus chimed in. "Can I be the flower girl?" Tyler asked, making the adults laugh. "Spring?" Alexander said, his arm tight around Ariana's waist. "We want a spring wedding." "April," Ariana added. "Cherry blossoms and new beginnings." "Perfect," her grandmother said with satisfaction, appearing at Ariana's elbow with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Perfect timing for grandbabies before I'm too old to spoil them properly." "Abuela!" Ariana protested, but she was laughing. "What?" the older woman said innocently. "I'm 87, I don't have time for long engagements." As the evening progressed, as family members shared stories and offered toasts and started making lists of wedding preparations, Ariana found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. 1 year ago, she had been desperate enough to ask her boss to be her fake boyfriend. Tonight, she was planning a real wedding to the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "No regrets?" Alexander murmured in her ear as they sat together on the familiar couch, surrounded by the warmth and chaos of her family. "Only one," she said, turning to face him. "What's that?" "I regret waiting so long to realize what was right in front of me," she said softly. "I regret all the time we lost being afraid." "No time lost," he said firmly. "Every moment led us here. Every day of working together, every late night in the office, every professional conversation that made me fall a little more in love with your brilliant mind. It all mattered. It all brought us to this." "To this," she agreed, looking around at the family that had welcomed him so completely, at the life they had built together, at the future stretching ahead of them bright with possibility. "I love you, Mrs. Ford-to-be," Alexander whispered against her ear. "I love you too, Mr. Lewis Ford," she replied, making him laugh. "Hyphenated names?" "Equal partnership," she confirmed, "in everything." "In everything," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like home. Final message. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the smallest lies. White lies told to protect our hearts, desperate lies told to save our pride, innocent lies that somehow reveal the deepest truths about who we are and who we're meant to love. Ariana and Alexander's journey reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with fanfare and fireworks. Sometimes it grows quietly in conference rooms and elevator rides, in shared glances and professional respect that slowly transforms into something deeper and more precious than we ever dared to imagine. Their story teaches us that the right person doesn't just love us despite our ambitions and dreams, they champion them. They restructure their entire world to protect our goals. They see our success not as competition, but as collaboration in building something beautiful together. Most importantly, their love shows us that sometimes we have to be willing to risk everything: careers, comfort zones, carefully constructed walls around our hearts, to reach for the thing that will make us whole. Because in the end, love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into the life we've already built. It's about finding someone worth rebuilding everything for, someone who makes us brave enough to become the best version of ourselves. Alexander and Ariana found each other in the most unexpected way, but they chose each other every single day after that first Christmas kiss. They chose love over convenience, truth over protection, and partnership over playing it safe. And that's what real love is. Not a single moment of magic, but 1,000 daily choices to build something extraordinary together. A question for you, now that you've followed Ariana and Alexander from their desperate Christmas deception to their joyful engagement, we want to hear from you. Have you ever told a small lie that ended up revealing a deeper truth about what you really wanted in life? Whether it was about love, career, family, or dreams. Sometimes our white lies show us exactly what our hearts have been hiding from our minds. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories of unexpected honesty, of finding truth in fiction, of discovering that sometimes the thing we're pretending to want is actually exactly what we need. These are the moments that connect us all. Because just like Ariana and Alexander, we're all just trying to find our way home to the people and dreams that make us feel most like ourselves. Your participation means everything. Please share your thoughts and let us know. What truth has a small lie revealed in your own life? The end. Thank you for joining us on this journey from fake to forever. May you find your own Christmas miracle in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.